All right. Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. As you can see, there's two of us on the screen here. Myself, I am Cody Hedberg, and Tim Peterson is here with me. And we're going to be covering OSHA's injury and illness record keeping. So over the next 45 minutes, we will be discussing a lot of different information that goes into particularly with injuries and illnesses on how they should be recorded, what should be recorded. But one thing I want to ask you is please use the chat function. If you do have questions, please type them in there and we will try to address all the questions as we go through this webinar. So with that, I am Cody Hedberg. I am the regional director for the Dakotas, Western Minnesota area. I've spent a lot of time in safety, and there is my contact information at the bottom. I'm going to have Tim introduce himself here real quick.
Good morning. Yes, Tim Peterson. I've been involved in the safety for now about 30 years. I've been with OECS 29 years, and have seen over those years many what if questions on OSHA record keeping. Also looked at a lot of OSHA logs that were overly filled out or incorrectly filled out. So please, if you do have any what if, some challenging questions, please let us know so we can discuss them and help you out at that time. And my contact information is available if you want to just email me at a later date. I'll be more than glad to talk with you about your questions too. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. So with this, we're going to go through quite a bit of information, but we're really going to start out with what is the rule and why it is there. We'll cover all this different criteria over the next 40 minutes or so with you, and really kind of go in depth about some different nuances that definitely do come in with the recordables and what should be put on your logs there. So really the whole point of this is to understand what types of injuries or illnesses that you are having within your workplace. We want to make sure that we are following up with those, doing our due diligence, understanding what were the causal factors and what really contributed to those particular injuries or illnesses that happened within the workplace. And not only that, but one of the big things that we do get questions on quite a bit is, well, workman's comp accepted this claim, is it really an injury or an illness? And not necessarily the case. They're two separate entities, and you really need to do your due diligence and understand what are the recording criteria, which we will cover today within this presentation. So a couple different things with some exemptions on the recording of your injury and illness log. If your company had 10 or fewer employees at all times during the last calendar year, you do not need to keep that unless you're surveyed by OSHA or the BLS. And that's based on the entire size of the company. So this one comes up quite often. I get questions, hey, we got 9 employees, but we hired 2 temp workers throughout the year, or we hired an intern. Well, we really need to look at how many total employees did you have throughout the year, and make sure that you do follow or fall under that exemption in those cases. So you need to include those temporary people or temporary employees that you may have if you're temporarily staffing or interning or bringing somebody like that in. We need to count that in your total number of employees there. So with that, we've got a couple industry exemptions depending on what industry you're in, but for the most part, agriculture, construction, manufacturing, utilities, wholesale trades, all of those are completely covered. Some in the transportation, retail, service sectors, they may be partially exempt, but if you refer to 1904, the CFR 1904 standards, that will give you those lists in Appendix A, will give you that information. So if you have questions on that, please refer to that or give us a call or shoot us an email and we can help assist you through those types of questions there. But the recording criteria really comes down to, if you have employees and there is a fatality, injury, or illness, you've got to go through some questions to figure out, is it work related? Is it a new case? And then does it meet certain criteria? And we'll talk about this criteria as we move forward with this. And right now, we do have a poll question that we'd like everybody to take a couple seconds. We'll give you about 15-20 seconds to answer it, but have you completed your 300A form yet?
give everyone about 10 more seconds to respond.
Perfect.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and close out that poll now and share those results.
All right. So we've got about 3/4 of you that are still working on it. I know that we're just barely into the new year, but this is one thing that you want to make sure that you stay diligent on and keep things up to date, because there is certain posting and criteria that goes along with that. And we'll talk about that towards the end. But yes, Tim.
Cody, there was a chat question that just came up, and Heather, if you could repeat that so we could get that answer. It was on a size exemption.
Yep, sure. We do have a few, so I'm going to keep a few till the end. But the one I think you're talking about is, does the size exemption apply if my contract employee is through an agency versus directly contracted by my organization?
The bottom line is, if they're working under your direction and you are controlling them, and you're paying them either through an agency or you're paying them directly, they are your employee and they do fall under the OSHA record keeping guideline, if that answers that question. So they were injured on your property, and that's really where it boils down to.
Yeah, that's a pretty common scenario that I get posed, at least, is I've got a temporary worker and the staffing agency is going to take care of their injury. Well, you are really the one that, like you said, Tim, is directing or supervising their work activities. So that's really kind of what comes into play there. You have more control over that than the staffing agency. So great question on that one, definitely. So with that, we'll move on to the 5 steps here. This really is kind of just a great decision tree to look at, what are the injuries or illnesses, and really delve into, are they a recordable? So we'll go through these in detail here over the next few slides. So first one here, did the employee experience an injury or illness? And when we look at this, here's the definition of an injury or illness. It's an abnormal condition or disorder, but it includes quite a bit there, as you can see, but it's not limited to a cut, fracture, sprain, amputation. Illnesses also include both acute and chronic. Could be skin, respiratory, or a poisoning that may happen. So really what you're looking at is, did something happen to a particular employee at your workplace? So looking at that, this is that first question or step within this process to look at, is an actual recordable going to end up on your OSHA 300 log?
But Cody, this is where that heart attack would all come into play on the work process, right?
Yeah, definitely. And we'll talk a little bit about that here, in a little bit too, about some of those extenuating circumstances and what may happen with certain individuals with pre-existing conditions, maybe in those cases. So the next one is going to be, is it work related? And when we look at work related, it's resulting from an event or exposure in the work environment. There are some exceptions to it, but we do get questions, and I get questioned on this quite a bit, with the traveling that we do now. I had a guy that was traveling from point A to point B between job sites or from facility to facility. Is that a recordable? And it's not an easy answer to it. You've got to really understand, what are their work requirements? What is that work environment, which in their case, if they're traveling in a vehicle, that would be a work environment in those cases, such as, delivery drivers. You've obviously got to look at their work environment as their vehicle traveling back and forth. So that's one that can be work related. And then this is where you kind of come in with that heart attack comment earlier, Tim. One of the common ones that we get in the upper Midwest in this time of year is, hey, somebody was out shoveling the front step off and now they're complaining of chest pains. Is that a work-related injury? And in most cases, yeah, because they're doing work through the course of your business on paid time. So that may be a pre-existing condition, but it maybe exacerbated that or caused that particular heart attack at that moment. So keeping that in mind as you're going through this decision tree. And that's where there's a lot of questions, gray areas, and really comes down to your due diligence about interviewing and trying to gather all the facts that happened with these injuries or illnesses. So work environment, like I had mentioned here, it really is, it's all encompassing depending on where you're working or what type of industry you may be in. Maybe physical locations, but it also may be the equipment that your employees are using, such as a delivery driver that is moving from multiple points throughout the day. Their locations can be not only the truck, but where are they walking to, coming from? So those types of situations can create a bigger window for that opportunity to fall within that work environment. So with that, we've got travel status also. This one is always a point of contention. I know Tim and I have talked about this quite a bit, and there's different scenarios that do come out. But if you're traveling from point A to point B, the easy question is, yeah, but there are circumstances that go into it. I worked in construction for many years. We had guys that would travel in a company vehicle out to a job site. Yes, they were covered under it at that point, but once in a while we'd get an employee that couldn't join in or had other plans or something, and they were to report to the job site. So they were in transit at that point. And, in those cases, it was a personal reason why they weren't going somewhere. So they hadn't or didn't fit the definition of a work-related injury or illness at that point. So, Tim, you have anything to add on that one?
Not a lot, except for the vehicular part, which we'll get into on state and county highways and such, but we'll cover that as we get into it. But otherwise, no, we're good.
Okay. And then another big one is working from home. With the pandemic, with all the change in the work atmosphere over the last year or two, this is another big one, and it adds a lot of gray area, I guess is the best way to put it, because it's not 100% clearly defined. When you look at this, if you've got an employee working from home and you're compensating them, that's their work environment. That is where they need to be. If they get up and move around and trip over something and cause them to get injured, then yes, it's going to be a work-related injury. So that's a bigger element that hasn't been as prevalent in the work environments as it has been in the last 2 years. So we want to make sure that people that are working from home, are still adhering to the same programs and everything, housekeeping, assessing those work sites, making sure that we are in the best possible situation to prevent any of these injuries or illnesses that may happen. So another aspect just to kind of work through as you're going through this decision tree on this. So we do have some exemptions, and I'm not going to talk about all of these, but the third bullet point is one that has always struck a chord with me. Getting out there, and especially if you have somebody traveling, which we as a company travel quite a bit. If I'm staying in a hotel and I have a hot plate and I decide to make supper for myself and burn my hand on that hot plate, it is not a recordable in that case. In that case, it was for personal consumption. I was making my own supper, same thing I would have done if I was at home at the time. So therefore, it would fall under this exception. And then I'm going to kick this over to Tim for the motor vehicle accident in the parking lot. I want you to further elaborate on that one for me.
Yeah, anything on company property, you get your car stuck in the snow and somebody's helping you push it out and they suffer a musculoskeletal injury. That is an OSHA recordable work-related situation as far as the OSHA law goes. Their exceptions to that rule is driving down the freeway road and they're involved in a vehicular accident. Those exceptions are laid out differently because you can't control what the other part of the population is doing. So that's that exception to the rule on the vehicular part of it. But that's why OSHA looks at it and says, hey, you can control your parking lot. You can control the environment on your property. And so if somebody gets injured based on helping somebody out, it is recordable. Right down to, I had a situation where an individual was stung by a bee in the parking lot and he had a reaction to it and had to go to the hospital. That was OSHA recordable because again, they had control on how they can clean up and take away the weeds and nesting areas for insects and bees and such like that. So those are the ones that get a little bit frustrating, but it's the ones that we got to look at as the concept that Cody's been talking about. It's on your property, it's in your control of how you can handle and reduce that potential risk.
We do have two questions, if I can cut in really quickly. So someone asked, what if an employee slipped on the ice outside on a paid break?
If it's on a break, it doesn't matter because they're still on company property. It's like getting their car stuck. They're off shift. They go out there and it's on company property. It's on company business. And so that paid break is part of what their agreement is as an employee. So that would still fall within the recordable part.
Correct.
Right. Thank you. Next question. What if an employee drives over another employee's toe on their lunch break? Would that be recordable?
In the parking lot you're talking about, who said and somebody drives over somebody in a car with a car in the parking lot?
Yes, it says yes, on company property.
Yes, that would still be a recordable.
Yeah. Depending on the outcome of injuries or anything like that, but yes, that would be definitely recordable on that company property. Once again, kind of goes back into the same thing Tim had been talking about. You have control over that and you have the ability to reduce those hazards within that area. So you would have control there.
You know, this is why companies put in the speed bumps and controls on speed and make sure that snow and ice is cleared up in regular basis, because it is a continuous working process, but it also can come back and add to your record keeping document.
Yep, definitely is. And that's one of the big ones up here in the upper Midwest is that ice, you know, taking care of that and really being diligent about that to prevent those types of injuries or stuff from happening. Definitely.
All right, one more question before we move on, just came through kind of under the similar circumstance. It says we had an employee that was hit by another driver on the way to a DOT inspector class. It was deemed a work comp claim, but is it an OSHA recordable since it did not happen on company property?
So was this a on a highway where it was a vehicular accident on the highway situation? Where if that's the case, then that's an exception to the rule on a public road. There's, you know, some other controls in the construction site on a construction road where the general contractor or the contractor would have control on keeping up that traffic flow. There's variables on that, but from the way you explained it, no, it would not be a recordable. It would fall into that exception to the rule.
Yeah. Okay. All right, so we've got through the first two steps. Now we're on to step 3. So this injury or illness a new case? This one comes up once in a while where is it a new case or is it something that was previously recorded or an injury or illness that may have been re-injured or re-exacerbated in those situations? So really looking at, you know, having the documentation and understanding where your logs are at and seeing, has that particular employee reported this previously to you? If not, then it would be a new case in that situation. And good examples of this that may come into play once in a while. And I have these questions. I actually just fielded one here not too long ago, where an employee went in to have surgery on some musculoskeletal issues. But they had been seeing a doctor for almost 2 years previous. The tough part was that they hadn't informed the employer that they were having issues. And that's where it gets to be frustrating from a safety standpoint, because if we would have known about it, we could have maybe put some other protocols or procedures or processes in place to minimize that. So in this case, it's a new case because they didn't know about it previously, but they now need to look back and figure out what other types of medical treatment may have been done, and that will be done on the work comp side. But as far as your OSHA recordable, it will be recorded on the day that it was brought to your attention, and let you do your due diligence and go through the investigation process and understanding what actually happened there. So this is always something good to look at, make sure that it is a new case. If it's previous, make sure that we document it and really can tie it back to the original report of injury that employee had that affected that area.
And if you're wondering why that is, it's that whatever job you were putting that person in could have aggravated that pre-existing condition. And it kind of goes back to what we try to tell everybody to, do physicals and workability tests and stuff to see if there's any issues that could come back and potentially haunt you on down the road.
Yeah, and you bring up a great point there, Tim. And not only that, but having a good detailed job description is also very helpful in the record keeping aspect, to understand where restrictions or days away may come into play that we'll talk about here in a little bit. So thank you for bringing that up, Tim. Step 4 here is, does the injury or illness meet the general criteria? This one gets to be a little bit more time involved in this in a lot of cases. So, did it result in a death? How about a day away from work or days away from work or restricted activity? Can they not come back and do what they're supposed to be doing or originally doing? Do you need to transfer them to another job? Maybe it was medical treatment beyond first aid, which we'll talk about first aid here in a minute. But this is a question I get quite often. Hey, we had an employee that passed out or lost consciousness. Do we need to record it? Yes, you do in that case. And then any other injury or illness that a professional licensed healthcare provider is treating somebody for. So days away, record this. If the case involves 1 or more days away from work, you'll check the box on there and include the number of days that goes along with it. The big thing here is, if I get injured today, I will not start recording that, whether it's days away or restricted time, until tomorrow. It's the next full day that you will start that recording. So it's the 6th today. I would start recording the day on the 7th until I can either come back to work, or with restrictions, I am released back for full duty in those cases. So with this, another one that comes up quite often is, I had an employee that got injured on the 4th of November. How do I record the days away? They're giving me a time frame of 3 months before this employee is released. I've got to complete my forms and get them posted by a certain date. I don't know if that will be back. In those cases, you'll record up to 180 days, which is what it's capped at. And then you will monitor that. And as that person comes back to work, you will go back and recalculate that and make that correction or reentry into your log at that point. Another thing that comes up is, I'll go back to, I got injured today. Tomorrow is when I start recording. My next scheduled day is Monday. Do I have to record weekends? Yes, it is calendar days. It doesn't matter when that person is scheduled to work. It starts on that day, and you include every calendar day moving forward. So that one comes up quite a bit. And that's really based on that medical information that you will receive from that treating physician or healthcare provider in those cases. And we'll talk about this a little bit more on the restricted one when we get to it, which is now. Restrictions, this is a big one that people tend to really question quite often. I've got an employee that, comes back from the doctor and they tweak their back or they did something, and the doctor's saying they can't lift more than 25 pounds. You look at it and job tasks that they have doesn't ever require you to lift more than 25 pounds. So is that a restriction for the job that you have? And in that case, it's going to be no. That's where the detailed job descriptions and really having a good rapport with those treating physicians or that designated medical provider will really help you out on the record keeping aspect. So you want to make sure that you're fully understanding what those restrictions are, but having a detailed job description is really the easiest way to minimize a lot of that, because if your job description says you got to lift 25 pounds, once a week, and they give you a 25-pound weight restriction, is it really a restriction of what they can do at that point? So be as detailed and as descriptive as possible in those job descriptions if you can. So anything you want to add on this, Tim, with restricted?
The only important thing is we've had employees come back and say, geez, the doctor didn't give me any report. They just told me to take it easy and don't lift much or whatever. You as the company and the person that's controlling these things need to say, well, we need to get you back to that doctor and we need to get a workability sheet of what does he mean, what does she mean by that? And part of that starts out with really talking to your care providers and letting them know that you're really part of this process. And the more information they can give back, the better you can work with the employee. But also it's a lot easier to keep your record keeping clean and the way it's supposed to be.
Yeah, and that you bring up a good point too, is not only that having that good relationship, but also being able to get that paperwork in a timely manner so that you can manage those cases and you can work with those individuals to get them back to work as soon as possible in those situations. So medical treatment, this is another one that, comes up, and we'll talk about the first aid part of this, but really it is the management or care of a patient to combat a disease or disorder. And it's normally done by a professional licensed healthcare provider. But we get this quite often too, where, hey, we had a guy who went to the hospital and they just put him under observation. Do we have to record this? No, there was no treatment that went on. They're just observing to ensure that nothing further was needed. Diagnostic procedures is another common one where they'll go in and get checked out for a few things, not a recordable in those cases. And then first aid, which there's quite a few different things that fall into first aid that we want to go through here. Tetanus is a common one. Hey, my guy went in and got a tetanus immunization. Is that a recordable? No, it's first aid. So it doesn't fall under there. And as you can see, there's quite a few different items that are on this list. This list is out there on OSHA's website. Just type in first aid or search it through one of your search engines, and it should be able to populate this list. And there's about 16 or 17 different items on this list. Drilling a fingernail or toenail to drain it, putting an eye patch on, flushing an eye with eye irrigation, or using a cotton swab. Those types of things really do fall under the first aid, which doesn't mean that it was medical treatment, and it isn't a recordable at that point for that individual. This one, though, like I said before, with loss of consciousness, if you do have an employee that loses consciousness, it must be recorded. There's got to be some other reasons behind it. And in most cases, you're going to send that employee in to get a medical evaluation done anyways, but it has to be recorded just to figure out why something went wrong in that situation. If you have one of those that you have questions on, please reach out to us and we'll go through some of the details with you and try to guide you on that if you have questions. Another big one is bloodborne pathogens. I know a lot of industries, a lot of businesses out there don't have a high risk with this, but if something were to happen and somebody got stuck or cut or came into contact with blood or other potentially infectious material, make sure that goes on the OSHA log. Make sure that you're documenting that and taking care of that individual with the follow-up treatments or other testing that may need to be done in those situations. But like I said, most industries don't have a high risk, but if it does happen, just make sure that we're recording that on those logs.
Cody, there was a pop-up question that I just
Yep.
noticed, and it's perfect timing. If an employee
Yep.
goes to a clinic and gets x-rays and the x-rays are negative, that is not recordable because it's a diagnostic. They're seeing if there is a problem, and there
Yep.
isn't. You know, so you're correct on those situations. If the x-rays came back where there was a break or a crack or whatever the case may be, yeah, now it changes into the category of recordable.
Yes, definitely. And that's great. Yeah, that's a diagnostic, and there's a lot of different things that healthcare providers do use for diagnostic measures. So really kind of understanding that and seeing what the outcomes are is really critical on that. So thank you, Tim, for bringing that up. COVID-19, as you can read on this slide, the biggest things here is looking at those COVID cases and answering yes to all three of these questions. If you answer yes to all three of these questions, then it would be put on your OSHA log. But as you see with the statement on the bottom, there's a lot of uncertainty with this and really trying to document all of the different information that goes into a COVID-19 case that may happen in the business is really your due diligence to do that. We can't control where people are at outside of this, but just go through these three questions, and if you can answer yes to all of them, then it is more than likely going to end up on your OSHA log at that point. So with that, hearing loss is another big one that I tend to deal with or get questions or calls and comments about. I'd ask Tim, but he does have hearing aids. He's a little hard of hearing. So, but threshold shifts are something that does happen. And really being diligent about your annual audiograms and getting the results as soon as possible so you can review those and understand, has there been any shifts in that hearing within those employees that are under your hearing conservation program? The other big thing that I want to remind everybody about is if you do have a shift in there or something significant, you have up to 30 days to get them retested or to see an ear, nose, and throat specialist to see if there's any underlying medical conditions or other issues that may be causing that. So use that wisely in your course of business to make sure that we are not determining that, hey, we have a hearing shift because we didn't follow up or didn't do what else we could to ensure that the results were accurate. We all have other activities that we go do. People are not always the most forthcoming with answering the questionnaires properly. So making sure that we're diligent about this and following up with those is really critical to make sure that we aren't recording something that may have a different outcome if we would have had that follow-up testing. So with that, we'll get into the forms. So we've got quite a few different forms that OSHA does require, and we'll go through each one of these kind of in detail here. So OSHA's 300 form, this is the one that really is your playbook. You want to record everything on here that may be a recordable or is a recordable. And the big thing I want to remind people is you have certain criteria to make sure that this is filled out. Doesn't mean that you have to fill this specific form out, but make sure that we're keeping a running log of injuries or illnesses that are recordable within your facility. That way, if OSHA does come in, they're going to ask for the previous 5 years and any current year. You have to be able to produce this documentation in a timely manner. So it's not somebody back in a back room scrambling to throw things on there. Make sure that you keep it updated in a timely fashion in those cases. So this form will be the first one. And then we'll get into the first report of injury or injury and illness incident report, depending on what state that you're in, depends on what it may be called. But this is more detailed information on that specific case. As you can see, there's a lot more questions. Yeah, Tim.
Cody, before we move on in that, for those of you that are sitting there going, geez, I'm under the 10, I don't really have to do this under the OSHA guidelines, or even the ones that are required to. Look at these two forms as something that can be beneficial to you and your company, not just to comply with the OSHA regulations, but to use it as a tool to see where people are getting injured, times of the day, days of the week, types of injuries, different departments. We use this tool when we're working with clients as a visual to see and focus on different areas. So it's more than just a recording form. It's truly a document that can help you benefit and improve your safety within your organization.
Yeah, it's a great point, Tim. You know, looking at one of my first big forays into safety, looking at this and finding out that we had, you know, 90% of our injuries or 95% of them that were happening, it was either in the first hour or two on Mondays or the last 2 or 3 hours of the shift on a Thursday or Friday. So you knew that there was some distraction or something going on. So, you know, it gives you a good tool to look at how can we combat this? How can we eliminate these types of injuries from happening? So thank you very much for bringing that up, Tim, because it is beneficial in other areas, definitely. So then we move on to the 300A form, which is what is required to be posted. And this is just a summary for the entire establishment or company, depending on how you're set up there. And it will go through total number of deaths, the days away from work, days with job transfer restriction, and other recordable cases. It really just takes that 300 form and really breaks it down and summarizes it for an easy snapshot. And then you'll fill this form out, put all your information on there, have one of your company execs sign off that it is accurate, and then you will post this for your employees to be able to see. And in some cases, you may have to electronically report that we'll talk about here in a minute or two. But this is getting back to filling out these forms. Employers must enter each recordable case on the forms within 7 calendar days of receiving information that a reportable case occurred. So that's where I'm going back to make sure that we're staying up to date and keeping this as pertinent and updated as possible throughout the year. You know, I know we're only a couple days in, but you know, if you've already had an injury this year, you should be putting that on your forms to keep track of that. Like I said, if OSHA is going to come in, they're going to ask you those questions. Maybe your insurance company may be asking those questions. You know, we want to be able to produce that documentation for them. And also, like I said, you don't have to use their forms, although they do have PDF fillable forms and different things like that. I've seen people keep them in a lot of different formats. You can keep them electronically, but you need to just make sure that your access to those is met with the provisions in 1904.35 and 40, making sure that if somebody requests it, you can produce it in the time frame allotted there, and they have access to it. So
Cody, one thing with all these forms, with the 300 and 300A, even if you're running a perfect year, you have no incidents, no injuries, no lost times, you still have to complete those forms and bring down zeros into every column. Make sure you put in your code numbers, your hours, everything, and have it signed off as 0. OSHA still requires it, even if you are injury free or accident free.
Yep. And hopefully all of you are in that situation where you just carry the zeros across, right, Tim?
Yep. It makes the form a lot easier to fill out.
Yes, it does. A lot less paperwork for you. So with that, we've got some privacy issues that do come up once in a while. And this one doesn't get used as much as others or whatnot, but once in a while it is pertinent. So you may have an injury that is an intimate body part or reproductive system, maybe a certain infection, maybe a mental illness, something like that, bloodborne pathogen, needle sticks. And then also employees can voluntarily request that we keep their name off of that log. Just make sure that we document that and make sure that you still have the information. It just will not go on your 300 form at that point of the particular individual's name. We'll still record the rest of the information, just not their name in there. And that's why we've got the case numbers on there, so that we can keep track of those without having the person's name within there. So a couple things with multiple businesses, or hey, maybe we have multiple different facilities. And I know we run into this quite a bit, and a lot of you probably have this. Keep an OSHA 300 form for each establishment. And that first bullet point up there is really for, a lot of construction. We work with a lot of construction companies, and they have jobs that may go 2 or 3 years at a time. Keep that 300 forms separate for that case. If you've got short-term establishments, if you're doing construction or you're doing stuff like that, where you're going to be on a project for a couple months or 6 months, then you would just keep it all on one single form underneath that main entity. But each employee must be linked with one establishment. So if we've got projects, if we've got guys moving in and out of it, it makes it a lot more difficult to track those individuals within there. But if you've got 2 or 3 different buildings that are maybe in a similar complex or nearby, you need to have that employee linked to one of the establishments, so they can't hop back and forth if they get hurt. We want to make sure it all stays on that one particular form that they're established or linked to in that situation. So annual summary, this is that 300A form. Like I said, where Tim mentioned bringing all the numbers down, make sure you complete that. Make sure your numbers are accurate. Make sure that you have somebody else review it with you, just to make sure everything transferred over properly. And then you will have it certified by either an owner or somebody within the company will sign off on that. And then we will post that summary for the allotted time. So an executive that can sign off is the owner of the company, officer of the corporation, highest ranking company official working at the establishment, or his or her supervisor. And then it needs to be posted from February 1st through April 30th of the year following the year covered. So your 2021 logs should be up by February 1st and will need to be posted until April 30th of this year. And along with that, keep your logs for a minimum of 5 years past the current year. That's what OSHA does request when they access this information. And that way it allows you to go back and adjust your forms. If you have one of those injuries, it may not be a new case in that situation. So just update. Yeah.
These should be kept electronically, correct?
Yes, you can keep these electronically, but you just still need to go back to that accessibility guideline that's listed out there. And I know a lot of companies are moving away from paper. That's great. Just make sure that you have more than one person that can access that, because Tim doesn't show up on Tuesday because he's out sick or he's got a funeral. He's the only one that can access it. We need to have somebody as a backup to provide that information when requested. So great.
Cody,
Great.
I've had a few questions come in regarding the forms, so I want to go ahead and go over those really quick. So someone wrote in saying that they hadn't had any injuries and didn't think that they needed to fill out the forms. They had an OSHA inspection and they found out differently. The person said, I filled out the forms to get them caught up, but the inspector didn't believe that we didn't have any injuries. Do we record this no injury so that the inspectors believe that we have had no injuries? We have 6 employees and we work in manufacturing.
No, you don't have to do that. I'm sure part of the reason was there was nothing completed. And so when documentation isn't kept up and completed, it always throws up flags. But you don't have to prove you didn't have injuries. You just got to document the fact and keep everything up on a regular basis. That's really unusual. I guess in 29 years of doing this, I've never had an OSHA investigator challenge them on the fact that they have not had an injury. So I wouldn't change anything. Just make sure that every column is filled out with a 0. Your data on the summary log is filled out. All that is complete, and you should have a problem.
All right, thank you. Next question, does Form 301 need to be posted the same day as Form 300?
No, your 301 form will not be posted. The 300A is the only one that needs to be posted to show what your summary is. You don't want to post the other one because that has sensitive information as to who was injured and what types of injuries. So we want to make sure it's just that summary form that is posted.
All right, thank you. Next question. What if an employee works in Minnesota most of the year, but seasonally they work in Florida?
So are they working for you most of the time in Minnesota, or are they, and seasonally, is that for you as an employer?
Maybe we'll wait on some more information on that one.
Yeah.
I'll bring that
Yep.
one back up.
Yep.
We have another question. What if you have an employee that hurts their back or some other strain once a year or so, for example? That would be a case each occurrence once they are released by the doctor, unless it relates back to something specific.
Yeah, and I would definitely recommend doing your due diligence and trying to figure out why that employee keeps re-injuring themselves or injuring themselves in that same similar manner.
Just a clarification, if that injury is directly the result or a continuation of a previous injury that you've recorded, that's not a new injury. You go back to that original injury and add to that, okay? So that's the other thing.
All right, thank you. And then last question for now. Once we complete the forms and post the 300A at company, do we need to provide this information to OSHA?
We will be talking about that in just a quick second. So I'll answer that question as we go through this next slide or two. So fatalities, catastrophe reporting. This one updated a couple of years ago with the new reporting requirements. So any work-related fatality needs to be reported within 8 hours. 24 hours is the requirement for any amputation, loss of eye, or inpatient hospitalization of one of your employees or more. And the big thing with that is call OSHA. Physically pick up the phone and call them and talk to somebody and let them know. I know, like state of Minnesota, if it's after hours, you'll call federal Minnesota or federal OSHA at that point. But please do your due diligence and call and talk to somebody. That way it is reported. They don't like to, they won't allow you to email it, and they really don't like voicemails. They want you to physically talk to somebody. So if you call that number, it is answered. So make sure that you get that in. A couple other things, Tim had alluded to this a little bit before. We don't need to report highway or public street motor vehicle accidents that are outside of construction zones because DOT takes care of those. Same thing with the next one with the NTSB, DOT, different things like that, that will take care of overseeing those types of accidents that are happening out there. This is where I wanted to get into the reporting. So electronic reporting is the new requirement a couple of years ago. And as you can see, 20 to 249 employees that are classified in certain industries. So it's based on your NAICS code. You'll have to go out and search that, figure out if you're on that high risk list. You will have to submit your 300A form to OSHA. Any establishment 250 or more is required to do that no matter what your NAICS code is. But the one caveat to this is a federal standard. If you're in the state of Minnesota, it doesn't matter. Once you're at 20 employees or more, you have to physically submit your stuff online to OSHA on an annual basis, no matter what your NAICS code is. State of Minnesota wanted it to be done with any employer that has 20 or more employees. And those forms need to be submitted by March 2nd of every year. And make sure that if you are doing this your first year, don't go in on March 2nd and try to set things up. Make sure that you get ahead of it and create a login and create your password so that you can gain access to it and then understand how to submit the information there. And the information or website is listed there at the bottom. So hopefully that answered the question for that individual. And we've covered quite a bit. We've got about 10 minutes or so left that we'll hang around for some questions and whatnot. But one of the things we want to ask you is, how was the presentation or how was the webinar today? So please hopefully give us all 3 stars, but please be honest about it also and let us know what you guys thought of the material and presentation today.
All right, while everyone is filling that out, we do have some more clarification and some more questions here. So the clarification was they said they work in Minnesota in construction during the spring, summer, and fall, but due to the weather, some employees are sent to Florida for projects.
Okay. So in those cases, they're all short term. I would keep them on one log at that point, based out of the Minnesota office, since that's where the majority of their work is directed out of. Would you agree with that, Tim?
Yeah, definitely. It's a short-term basis and I wouldn't split them. I'd keep it all under one.
Yeah.
All right, next question. Where can we find the information if we need to file electronically?
Let me slide back up a slide if I can. If you want to pull the poll off, I can give that website out here again real quick. I think. So it's OSHA.gov/injury reporting /index. That should be where it would take you. Or if you just go out to OSHA's website, OSHA.gov, and type in injury reporting, it should bring up the links directly on their page for you. So the injury track.
Heather?
What was that, Tim?
I said I asked Heather if she had more questions we could cover.
Yes, okay. There are several other questions. Do restricted days also include weekends and holidays or just the work days?
Yep, that is
365 days a year.
Yep, calendar days, just like your days away or restrictions. So it would include even days that they're not scheduled to work, Saturdays, Sundays, holidays, all of that would be included until they're released for full medical, maximum medical release or back to work at that case.
Great, thank you. So the next one is, so if a person loses consciousness, it is recordable until the employee is medically released from the doctor?
It's recordable. You don't know how you're going to record it until you get the report back from the doctor, whether it's just recordable and there was no issues, or it's recordable with restrictions, or it's recordable with lost time. That part you got to wait until the doctor's report comes back to you on that. It could just be he or she just went unconscious and there was no injury, no illness. It was just one of those things. And so you still report it, but when you go across that line in a 300 log, everything's zeros on that part.
Yep.
Thank you. Does the 20 employee requirement for online filing include part-time employees?
Yes, it would include any employee that you've had throughout the year. So if you have some turnover, you may exceed that 20 employee limit very easily. So anytime you reach 20 employees throughout the duration of the year or have that many employees, that's where that would trigger at.
Thank you. I believe last question for now. So you only have to record positive COVID cases that can be proven that they were exposed to COVID at work and then were diagnosed with COVID?
Yeah, if you can answer those 3 questions that we had in here, that's when it would be a recordable case on your log.
Thank you, Cody. And then we did have several people type in about getting a copy of this recording. It will be available on the website, so keep an eye out for that probably in the next few days. Oh, we do have another question. In regards to the answers to the questions, is there a recording to show your supervisor?
Recording this presentation will be recorded and out on our website, definitely.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I guess, Judy, if you want to let us know if that's what you meant. Sorry, I didn't read it before I read it out loud. But if you want to let us know, Judy, if that's what you meant, or if you're talking about a different kind of recording, let us know. I believe that's all the questions we have for now.
Yeah, all the questions that were discussed and our answers are all recorded. So, yep. But again, if you have questions and you'd like us to answer individually by phone or email, please let Cody or I know, and we can set up a time to talk to you or your team and help understand any unique situations you may have and may not want to bring up now. It's up to you. Please use this to help you out on this part.
Yep. And the other thing is we offer continuing ed credits or units with this. So One of our people within our organization will reach out to you and see if you need the continuing ed credits with that. So a couple other things. We've got another webinar coming up here in February, and that is the 5 C's of safety. So kind of the new framework for building a strong safety culture. And that'll be February 17th of 2022, and that'll be from 11 to 12 o'clock. So please join us on that. You'll see the registration out on our website. Please get registered and attend that one if you're looking for some more information. So with that, I just want to thank everybody again for spending the last hour or so with us, and hopefully we were able to answer some questions and move you
Cody,
forward.
there was one other question. Heather, you want to bring that up on the heart attack?
Yeah, someone wanted to know if heart attacks that aren't at work are something that was recordable.
If they didn't happen at work, then they would not be a recordable injury at that point. If they were exacerbated or maybe caused by something at work, you could maybe correlate that or try to work through that. But in most cases, if it didn't happen at your facility or in the workplace, then it would not be a recordable in that situation.
That's correct. Yes. Again, if we missed your question or didn't answer it to your satisfaction, please reach out to us. I appreciate any questions and help you get through this process. It's something, if you keep it up as injuries occur, it's a lot easier, but hopefully everybody gets to fill them out with zeros across the bottom. That would be great.